Good afternoon. Welcome to the Weekly Livestock Market update. I'm Brownfield anchor reporter Meghan Grubner with us as always to talk all things markets. University of Missouri, Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Megan. How about those Chiefs?
Yeah, it's fine. I was going to start off by saying we literally have been through 3 of the 4 seasons this week in Kentucky. I'm sure you're similar, but like 75 degrees yesterday. I think we got like 10 feet of rain. Not sure. Saw animals starting to move 2 by 2 as we were going to school and picking the boys up. And today we took them to school in flurries. So welcome to not quite spring in the Mid-South.
We sent you those flurries from yesterday here. We're going to start coming out the other side. So it's going to be a great weekend.
Well, I'm glad somebody does. I'm just going to skim over your Chiefs comments because we all know how you feel about that. All right. We're going to talk retail prices today and farms and land and farms. And that's it. It's kind of a short week for us. So to kick things off, let's recap what happened this week in the markets.
Yeah, Megan, this week in cattle markets, we'll call cash-fed cattle $1.75 higher on the week. Those feeder steers this week were 2 to 4 lower. We got a little strength in heifers, but not on the feeder steer side of the equation. April live cattle futures contract was up 67.5 this week, and the March feeder cattle futures was up 12.5 cents. We got some strength on choice box beef this week, up $7.75. That actually moved it above year-ago levels for the first time this year. And when you look at those components, we were up across the board in all those components, and ribs were up nearly $15 this week, Megan.
I wanted to talk a little bit about, and let's talk slaughter numbers first, and I'll come back to that. So as we take a look at slaughter totals, it's really been interesting watching how things are going in. And although we're not talking about year-to-year comparisons, I do see those numbers, and it's definitely interesting to pay attention to.
Yeah, for sure. So the run on the cattle side this week, 627,000 head of cattle for the week ending February 18th. That's 3,000 head below a week ago, 43,000 head below a year ago. On the hog side, a run this week at 2.505 million head of hogs. That's up 19,000 head from where we were a week ago, and up 23,000 head from where we were a year ago.
When we see some of these numbers, I know obviously on the cattle side of things, we're running into smaller and less numbers specifically, but on the hog side, do you anticipate us slowing slaughter pace some? Are we concerned about the availability of market-ready hogs in the near future or coming down the line? How is that shaping up for the rest of this year?
So I think we're going to find ourselves continuing to grow a little bit in terms of slaughter numbers as we go through the year. Again, I don't want to throw up too many cautionary flags about that statement, but just I think a lot of sideways in terms of breeding inventory, et cetera. To me, we get a little bit of pop probably in productivity that gets us a little more hog slaughter as we go through 2023.
Retail prices is probably the biggest story of the week for us as we take a look at those numbers. Not so impressive compared to where we were a month ago, but if we go pre-COVID levels, it's definitely something to stand out.
Yeah, for sure. So you look at beef retail price for January of this year, $7.57. That was up 1.6% relative to last month. I kind of wonder if we're beginning to see what could be continued increases in that beef retail price as beef supplies get a little more constrained going forward. However, when you look at that relative to where January of 2019 was, so I keep anchoring off of 2019 only because that was pre-COVID year. We're up 29%. So we've certainly seen a pretty rapid increase over the last 3 years in beef prices. If you switch gears and look at the pork retail price, it was $4.79 a pound in January of this year. It's actually down 0.9% relative to the December number. But just like for beef, the retail pork price is up 29% relative to January of 2019. And you just look at the components here for a second. And on the pork side in particular, you and I talk about bacon all the time. So relative to 2019, bacon prices are 23% above where they were in January of 19. However, boneless ham prices, which again, I remind, boneless ham prices, 38% higher than where they were in January of 19. I'll say there, both strong demand and lack of labor probably to get us boneless hams has been at play in pushing those ham prices even higher.
And that may be one pork item that is loved more in this house by a couple of 5-year-olds than even bacon. I will just say that as well. When we look at the retail prices, and I know we're not necessarily talking demand today, but even at prices that are well above where they were in 2019, we're not seeing demand back off that much.
Yes. So we have a few signs we're not as strong as we once were on the demand side. That is out there. However, when you look at the general economy, we're probably getting a little more optimistic about the near term relative to what some might have thought was a recession that would start in the first quarter of 2023. I guess the other piece for me is, we're starting to now flatten the growth. So much of the growth we saw relative to 2019 occurred in the first couple of years. So perhaps that's going to keep consumers okay with where we're at in terms of higher meat prices. I will say, I think higher interest rates will continue to be weighing on the available dollars for food purchases. So that's one I continue to watch, especially if we continue to see increases by the Fed in terms of interest rates.
Farms and land and farms out this week. Let's talk a little bit specifically about farm size first, and then we can talk about dynamics.
Yeah, for sure. So when you look at the 2022 data that got released today by NASS, the average farm size continues to grow. It was 446 acres in 2022. When we started 2020, we were at 444 acres. So we've grown a couple of acres in terms of that average farm size. So that treadmill hasn't stopped. We actually saw number of farms drop about 10,000, a little less than 10,000 over the 21 to 22 period as well. So again, in 2015, we were at 2.1 million 2.1 million farms, and today we're sitting at 2 million farms. So less farms getting bigger. Part of that data
Is some of that to do with what's happened from COVID, from drought, from like all of these factors, maybe more outside factors coming in, not having a proper succession plan in place, those types of elements coming into play here?
So I check the box for all the above in that description. I'll say I think that when you look at what's going on, I keep saying we're adding a lot of technology, new technology in production agriculture, and that new technology rarely is what I'll call scale neutral. So you need to use that technology over more units, which just means we're getting bigger over time to stretch the large fixed cost of some of that technology over more units of output. We could talk about, if I'm going to buy one of the newest tractors that are out there that is one of the autonomous versions, I'm going to want to drag that over a lot of acres. And I think that is part of what's happening in terms of this getting bigger.
It's really interesting to watch. It'll be interesting to see, I guess, how these numbers look then a year from now for the numbers for 2023.
For sure. And I always say, I think if you let economics play, we're going to continue to talk about larger and larger farms as we look forward. And
that's not just row crop, right? Are we potentially bracing ourselves for a transition away from smaller livestock operations, or more transitioning from smaller livestock operations to larger scale.
Yep, for sure. And interesting you bring that point up. I'll say to the cattle industry in particular, I kind of wonder if we aren't gonna, in the next growth phase of the cattle industry, it'll be growth in larger operations that happens. And I think to your comment about succession planning, I'll sometimes say those smaller beef cow operations, they're financially going to stay for as long as that operation wants to exist. Sometimes that's because there's off-farm income to supplement that beef cow operation. But I think as soon as the current operators decide they'd like to retire, the sons and daughters or relatives or others, aren't there really wanting to have that smaller beef cow operation. So succession planning is certainly a problem, I think, in those smaller operations. And then we see all the technology that isn't scale neutral, even in the cattle side of the equation, that I think just expands the average herd size going forward.
Scott, as we look ahead to next week, a fairly busy week for us. One of the reports that comes out is quarterly ag trade outlook. What are you looking for there in terms of maybe some high points and some concerns?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing here is just where are we seeing growth in trade coming over the next year is a piece of that puzzle. I'll always say growth outside the United States is what's going to drive ag consumption, ag markets higher. And so I want to see whether we see from USDA at least getting that forecast of additional growth in trade going forward, or are we going to continue to slow down? China's going to be a big part of that discussion, I think, when we look ahead. So I think that will be interesting to see what is coming up in the next fiscal year.
And the other reports ahead of us next week?
Yes, we'll get livestock slaughter out, as well as then I'm really interested in cattle on feed next Friday, just to see if we continue to talk about fewer head on feed, as well as what we did in terms of placements. And we also get cold storage at the end of the week.
Sounds great. We will talk to you then. Have a great weekend.
Hey, you do the same, Megan.
So our weekly livestock market update delivered your email box every Saturday morning. Go to brownfieldagnews.com. You can also submit questions and comments there. And for market updates at the end of every day, check out John Perkins' Market Minute. One other quick thing I want to promote, our bottom line on Brownfield kicked off this week. It's a partnership we're doing with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. You can find that housed on Brownfield TV at brownfieldagnews.com. Have a great weekend. I'm Meghan Grevner for Brownfield.